Controversial and candid, Metro Center Outlook hits the road for an exclusive interview with Governor Rick Scott.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.
Hello everyone, I'm Diane Trees, Director of the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies. I recently had the chance to talk one-on-one with Governor Rick Scott for an in-depth review of his time in office. I began by asking him what had been the biggest surprise he'd encountered since taking the job.
Oh, I don't know if there's anything that's been unexpected. You know, probably the biggest thing that's different between this and being in the private sector, because I've been in business all my life, is the amount of media. So there's just, there's a lot of media. But the positive is, it's good because they hold you accountable. If I said something in the campaign, I mean, they hold you accountable for what you say, which I think is good.
Everything you say must be under scrutiny, though.
Everything. But, that's good because I believe in accountability, and I believe that I tell people my talks. I ran on a very specific campaign of how to get the state back to work, and if you think I'm straying, call me.
Well, Governor, when you talk about the campaign and your election, it was a narrow margin of victory. Mm-hmm. With an election result like that, does that make it more difficult to govern, the ability to govern the state?
If it does, I don't think about it. What I think about is, look, I think about, I sort of govern the way I live my life. I've been one of the most fortunate people in America. My dad was a truck driver. I started school living in public housing, but I was able to get an education. I served in the United States military. I got married at 19 and started getting into business. And so I've lived the American dream of, and I've got two wonderful kids. I'm going to be about to be a grandfather. So
congratulations.
So I think about what I think about is my job is, one, keep the cost of living as low as I can in the state, because I know how it impacted my parents. Two, make sure kids have a chance for a great education. And three, everybody's got to have the opportunity, no guarantees, opportunity for a job.
Well, you talked about your business background, and I know that you've implied that a business model or a corporate model is a good prescription to improve state government. There are so many models out there. Do you have an affinity for any one in particular?
Well, here's what I think about it. I think people that have been successful, whether it's in business or whether it's in academics or whether it's in, on politics, the people that are successful, they do, step one, they set a goal. They think about it and they set a goal. They know that you can't get anywhere without great people around yourself, So you do that, and then you measure the living daylights out of it, and you constantly improve and constantly change to improve. And so I think that's successful people in business have done that. And that's what I'm trying to do in this job. Get really good people around me. Let everybody know the path we're going down. Measure it to see if it's working, and if it's not, change.
So it's forming a team and then the accountability along with that.
Absolutely. And the other thing is the more information you put out. Like, as an example, I think with our schools, I think our schools ought to be ranked. We don't know who's the best school in the state, and also what the worst school is, and what's the differences. Because I think we need to raise all of our standards, whether it's for job creation, whether it's for education, whatever issue we're dealing with, or whether it's child safety. Set the goal, measure it, let everybody know how you're doing, because you know what? You might come up with a better idea, and you'll call and tell me. My job is to listen to all the ideas all across the state.
Let's talk a little bit about education. We have historically not funded it well in the state, and you've inherited that. Starting with higher ed, what role do you see that the universities can play in economic development?
Oh gosh, the universities are a key to economic development. We've got to make sure we continue to educate our, and that's whether it's our state colleges or whether it's our universities. But the children, or the kids, I guess they're not children by then, never thought of myself as a child probably then, that are getting degrees, that they can actually get jobs, and they can get jobs with growing companies. And so what I want to have more measurement is, what are we telling individuals that are going into the higher ed what the chance of a job is?
So a practical approach to it.
Yeah. I mean, I went to school to get a job. I needed a job. And so
you were a business major.
Yeah, I got an undergraduate in business, and then I went to law school, and I helped people buy companies for 9 years as a lawyer before I got, I did business all along the way, but I believe that was a way I could get a job. And I believe that's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be saying to kids, look, you ought to go pursue this path because there's a good job there. I think we need to have a lot more graduates in science and technology and engineering and math. We ought to let kids know from the earliest age possible that really those are probably some of the best opportunities. Now, if you still want to be a major in another area because you just have unbelievable passion for that, that's fine, as long as you understand the chances of making a living is not as good.
Putting
it's your
the
life.
realistic spin on what you need to do to survive anymore with the economy the way it is. You've proposed some fairly dramatic reforms to explore them, similar to what's going on in the state of Texas, and that would be merit pay, bonus pay for professors, possibly based on student evaluations or amount of students taught, questions with tenure. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Here, I have the opportunity to appoint the trustees for the universities and the state colleges. So what I want to do is I want to have a conversation. I don't know today what the right answer is, but I know where the result is. And the way I think about things is, in everything in life, I think I'm here. I've got to get to here. In higher ed, for me, it's how do we make sure that people are spending all that time and money to get these degrees because they're going there to get a job, that they know what the opportunity is. So then when people come in, I say, okay, let's have a conversation. One of the ways I did it is Governor Perry has a 7-step plan for Texas, and he's had a hard time getting it implemented.
A lot of controversy with it.
Right, absolutely. So what I want to say is, okay, so what's the logic of tenure? Is there a logical reason we have tenure? Should we do exactly the way we're doing it now? I mean, I don't know what the right answer is now. I want to get feedback from everybody, but I want to have that conversation.
So you're encouraging discussions and a number of different levels, but considering all options, and you want the feedback before any decisions are made.
And the higher ed needs to be take the lead on this. But what should we have tenure? Who should measure the performance of our professors? Right? In business, I'd say who's buying the product. That's whether you like it or not. They're judging you, right?
Right.
Every day. So in this case, shouldn't the student have a lot of involvement because they're spending their time and their money or their family's money, right? Shouldn't they have more involvement? Doesn't mean they should be the only one.
No, and it is a subjective measure, but universities, and UCF is one of them that does take into account student evaluations, but it's a piece of an overall evaluation package. So perhaps some modifications and encourage the discussion with it.
In business, if you think about it from a business standpoint, you don't ever agree necessarily with how your customer measures you, but they really decide whether you stay in business or not. And so if you think about it from a student standpoint, they're the ones that are deciding whether what they're getting out of it is worth it, right? Because they offer, they spend time and they spend money. So I think they ought to have a lot of involvement. On top of that, I really believe in merit pay. I believe that it just it rewards the performance you want. We want professors to just be unbelievably excited about the students and the subject and things like that. And so I think we ought to, if you look at successful companies, what they've been able to figure out, and it's never easy, but they've been able to figure out, how do I tie pay for the results that my customer wants? And the ones that have done it well, have done a good job. But what I want to start is, I want to say, we're here, we've got to get over here. What are the things that we ought to be changing? Because right now, we are not For example, I personally believe we need to have more science, technology, engineering, and math graduates. It's under 20%. So we're doing something wrong, or we could be doing something better. So let's have that conversation.
Let's talk a little bit about K through 12. This past year, we had an unprecedented amount of funding for charter schools. What are your thoughts on accountability for charter schools? Do they match what's the accountability standards for the public schools?
Well, first off, all schools ought to be measured, and they ought to be under similar measurement. Now, like in any business, even if you had 1,000 stores, they're all going to be different in ways. So you could put them in groups, but you've got to measure them. And so I want to make sure that and one thing people talk about is charter funding. What people talk about is that we applied some PICO funding for capital, and that was like $390. The public schools got $1,000. They just got their funding different ways. But a lot of people believe that the first thing we ought to be doing with education is always putting more money in. And we've done that for years and not gotten better results. I think if you think about it from a business standpoint, you would say, gosh, I don't think I'll keep doing the exact same thing if it's not working. What we've got to do is we have to stop and say, who's got the best model? How can Finland have better results and spend way less money than we do on education? What are they doing differently? In business, what I had was, if I had, as my company's got bigger, I would have what we called a best demonstrated practice team. And you'd say, if I had 400 locations, I'd say, give me the top 20 and the bottom 20. And what are the meaningful differences? We should be doing the exact same thing with education. Why is it that we have a school that can do so well, and then a school that with the same, it seems like the same issues do poorly? What is it?
But our standards should be the same for a charter school.
The measurement
should be an equivalent. Charter schools only make up 12% of the schools in Florida.
400 something.
And I was reading that they were responsible for almost half of the schools that failed with the FCAT, and that it's also very difficult to implement changes or even shut down some of the schools that are poor performance. What can we do to help streamline that process? Because our students are the ones that are losing that time period.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I agree with you that all schools ought to be measured. There ought to be a similar measurement. We ought to let everybody know. I mean, it ought to be all public information, because you as a parent, you should know how, if you're going to send your child to this school, or if you have choices, I mean, just like you have a choice on where to do anything else, you want to know what the options are. And it ought to be easier to, and this doesn't matter whether it's a charter school or it's a traditional public school, we ought to be able to close those or make changes as quickly as we can.
So it's the accountability, standards equal, and able to implement changes when they need to be made.
My experience is, and again, my background is business, but my experience is, if you put out all the information, things seem to happen faster. It's when we hold back information that things don't happen as fast. And when in anything, whether it's healthcare or whether it's retail or whatever, people always say, well, my whatever are different than everybody else's. And so we've got to come up with a measurement that you take that in consideration.
So the uniform. Let's talk a little bit about vetoes and budget cuts, which are never happy subjects, because somebody's always going to be in disagreement with what was made. One of the programs, it's Grow Florida, is administered through the University of Central Florida. This is the state's first attempt at economic gardening, which is a concept that nurtures small businesses here rather than luring them in from other places. You vetoed the $2 million budget for them, and they have created 3,200 jobs.
That's great.
Can you talk about the rationale for that decision?
Well, here's where it's never by itself, as you probably would expect. I walked in with a $3+ billion budget deficit projected, and with our credit rating was on negative watch, 12% unemployment, and so the way I'm very comfortable, the way to turn our economy around is make it so business people say, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If I'm going to pick to own a business, I'm going to own it in Florida. And the way you do it is you focus on taxes, fees, regulation, attitude, litigation risk, all those things. And so what I had to try to do is go through the budget and say, because there's a lot of things you'd love to do. I mean, but watch how all the dollars are spent, create as big a surplus as I can, because the credit agencies look at your surplus, knowing that in your budget you have some trust fund money and then you have general revenue money, and so the general revenue money is what the rating agencies look at. So I had to go through, and it's hard. There are so many good things that I would love to have funded, but somebody has to pay for it, and it's hard.
They've been able to get some donations and money
good.
together with that, and they are creating the kind of jobs with the diversification and the pay that we would like to have. So possibly funding might be reinstituted or
we'll
looked
go
at
through
again.
one thing being, this is my first year, is there's a lot of things came into the budget, like it seemed like, one thing about interesting about session, so there's 8 weeks of session, 50, I think it was like 50 bills passed the first 7, 250 passed the last week. You get the budget, and with all the new things in it, all at the last minute. Nobody sits down with you on all these things ahead of time. So it was an interesting
complex,
process.
yes.
Yeah.
I have to ask, because we're a PBS channel, you vetoed the funding for public broadcasting, and it's $4.8 million. Not a large segment considering budget $66 billion. Rationale for that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was just an issue of where
making choices.
Making choices. Look, public broadcast does a great job. There were so many things that you'd like to do, and because I'll tell you one thing that happens in this job. So far, nobody's come to me and said, you know what, I think you ought to cut this. Nobody. All they come to me is they say, even if it's for an issue that we all would care about, they'd say, oh, I want you to fund this. I said, well, we already put a lot of money over here for that. Would you like me to cut something out? Oh, of course not. And so it's hard because nobody wants their taxes to go up. As you know, our revenues have not been going up as a state. We'd like to put more money into education, and so it's not easy decisions.
It's a lot of balancing.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, you've been cautious about accepting federal dollars.
Right.
What is your philosophy for accepting federal money?
Let's think about the biggest problem in our budget right now is Medicaid, right? So any surplus we might have, it seems like because of the growth in Medicaid and all the rules the federal government has attached to it, we never have extra money because Medicaid just keeps growing. What I'm worried about is I worry about federal programs where they say, oh, here, Florida, here's some money, but we're going to give it to you for 3 years, and then we expect you to pick it up after the fact.
So a lot of consequences and ramifications that you're looking at.
So, one, they give you things that are short-term, okay? They give you things that are not with what you want to do in Florida. Everybody thinks it's free money. It's not, right? It's your tax dollars.
There are strings attached.
There's always strings attached. And it's just fascinating. It's our money, right? We send our money up to Washington, and then they tell us how we can spend it. What they ought to be doing is saying, you know what, here's your money back. We know you care about Florida probably more than we care about Florida because you all live there. They don't think that way. So I don't want to create programs that don't fit for Florida. I don't want to create programs that we have not decided that we want to do in Florida. Those are probably the two biggest things that I worry about.
Now, you are encouraging the state to make put in a bid for the $100 million that the Obama administration has proposed for the Race to the Top competition. What obstacles are you facing in getting the state to put in that bid?
Well, first off, that's a program that I believe fits with what we're doing in Florida. It complements what we already are doing in Florida. So that is something that, because it's what we already believe in, it's something that I think we ought to be doing. I think right now there's lots of politics and everything, and I think people are they want to be cautious. They want to be tied to saying they accepted stimulus dollars and things like that because it's got a negative connotation. My job is actually be the governor, and you have to choose the things that are good for Florida. Some things politically people don't like, but it's the right thing for the state.
So you're the obstacles or when is it right to say yes? When is it right to say no?
Yeah, and explain it. And you have to have the opportunity to explain it. And some people, they just say, "Gosh, that's that's federal money." You just say no. So and you can't do that. You've got to get into the details. And in the end, everything is always the devil's in the details. So you get into it and you look, and we still might say, "Gosh, there's some strings attached that don't make sense for us." And the other thing I try to do is make sure when we accept any money, if it's a short-term program that we know is a short-term program, I tell everybody it's a short-term program. It's not something we're doing forever, but we're going to try it, see if it works. Then we can, if the federal government's not going to fund it long-term, we'll make the decision at the time. So don't anybody anticipate that this will go on forever. This is federal money.
We've talked a little bit about the tax cuts. When you have revenue that you're trying to pull in, are there possibilities for Florida of closing some of the tax loopholes, such as the internet sales tax, that would give us potentially, some of the studies I've read, $1 billion in revenue? Is that a possibility down the line for us?
Well, I think that we have to, the way I think about it is, every dollar we take in a state from you as a taxpayer, there's fewer dollars that go to you buying a product or a service, fewer dollars that you might say, "Hey, gosh, I'm going to start a business and I have some money, I can do that." So it's not like there's every dollar we take into the government is less dollars in the private sector. So I look at two different things. I don't want to raise taxes in Florida. At the same time, we've got to be fair. We've got to be fair to business people. We've got to be fair to taxpayers. So I wanted to, I think we ought to have a discussion about that, and we ought to look at it. But it's not, for me, it's not a way to raise taxes.
So, well, you can look at it as raising taxes or lost revenue, so it's two sides of the thing.
Now, like on that one, if you buy on the internet, you're obligated to pay it right now.
Right. That's true.
You as an individual, you're obligated to pay it.
That's true. Governor, thank you so much for your time in that. Before we close, are there any thoughts that you would like to share with us?
Well, I think this is the greatest job in the world. If you like people, you can't pick a better job than being in Florida as governor. This is a great state. I think we need to brag more about our state. We have our 500th anniversary in 2013. Ponce de Leon came here in 1513, La Florida. So we are going to be the state that people say this is the model, because we have an economy that works, which will allow us to have the revenues where we can make sure we have the right safety net, we can have the right money for education, things like that. But we've got to grow our economy, and I think the right things are happening.
Thank you so much for your time and your candidness.
All right, thanks a lot.
I'd like to thank Governor Scott for his time and his candor. What do you think of the job the governor is doing? Join the discussion on our website and check out WUCF on Facebook. For Metro Center Outlook, I'm Diane Trees.
This program was made possible by funding from the Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.